I think some of my earlier videos have made it relatively clear what sorts of beliefs I hold. However, in the interest of having you understand those beliefs a bit better, I've decided to put together this video to be a bit more specific about all that. I hope after all is said and done, you'll have a better idea about my views and how those views inform the videos on this channel. Also, especially for any of you who aren't anarchists, I hope you can at least understand where I and the larger anarchist movement are coming from, even if you aren't 100% on my side. This might not be the most entertaining video I've ever made, but I hope it's at least informative. Part 1. What is anarchism? If we're to take the mainstream perception of anarchism, or more commonly, anarchy, at its word, then it's chaos, bomb-throwing mayhem, disorder, and immorality. In reality, this is the exact opposite of what anarchism seeks to achieve. Anarchy is the condition of society being without rulers. Monarchy is a system with one ruler, and oligarchy is a system with a small number of rulers. In the same way, anarchy is a system without rulers. Anarchy opposes authority and coercion, and upholds liberty, solidarity, and order. This last point is why one of the common symbols of anarchy is the A inside the O. My definition of anarchism is the same one that Noam Chomsky uses, but I'll put it into my own words here. Anarchism is the belief that social hierarchy, a system which ranks people above one another in terms of authority, status, and power, does not justify itself. Unless a given hierarchy can be justified, usually by whoever is holding more authority, then it is illegitimate. It should be dismantled and replaced with a more equitable relationship. In simpler terms, the burden of proof lies on those who exercise authority to justify that authority. This is not to say that anarchists reject all forms of authority. Rather, we reject coercive authority. A common example of justified authority is the parent whose child wanders into a busy road. The parent is justified in using force to remove the child from the road since it saves the child's life, potentially. An even simpler example would be Mikhail Bakunin's statement, "In the authority of boots, I refer to the authority of the bootmaker." When I'm asked about my political beliefs, I usually say that I'm a social anarchist or an anarcho-syndicalist, with some level of sympathy for anarcho-pacifism. I might sometimes use a term like libertarian socialist, but I have my reasons for using social anarchist instead, and I'll explain that just now. When the term libertarian socialism comes up, some people are confused by the use of these two terms in cooperation with one another, but this is easily explained. The use of libertarian in libertarian socialism dates back to the mid-19th century, where the term was used to refer to left-wing beliefs that would provide the basis for early forms of anarchism such as mutualism. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that libertarian was used to refer to right-wing free market enthusiasts. The second word of the phrase, socialism, is also used in its original sense to refer to worker control of the means of production. Libertarian socialism also heavily emphasizes principles such as direct democracy, free association, and workers' self-management. Again, it was only much later, and with the help of some good old-fashioned propaganda, that socialism was more associated with the absence of liberty and freedom. Currently, especially in North America, a more liberal definition of socialism has emerged, which refers to things like single-payer healthcare, social welfare programs, and publicly funded utilities as socialism. This has become especially popular ever since Bernie Sanders became a popular self-described democratic socialist around last year. However, he's much more in line with New Deal Democrats of the 1930s and 1940s, or European-style social democracy than he is with democratic socialism. And yes, there is a difference between those two terms. If there wasn't, then maybe the German Social Democratic Party wouldn't have killed Rosa Luxemburg all those years ago. So now that we know some of the basic premises of anarchism, let's look at how these premises combine to form a cohesive political viewpoint. Part 2. What are the unifying beliefs of anarchists? The two most important hierarchies which anarchists oppose are capitalism and the state. Of course, there are many other systems of hierarchy beyond these two, but it's often thought that capitalism and the state apparatus are the driving forces behind many of these other hierarchies, which we will talk about soon, don't worry. Capitalism is an economic system based on three guiding principles: private ownership of the means of production, exchange of goods and services in a market economy, and wage labor. We oppose this system for several reasons, but for time's sake, I'll list a few of the most glaring ones. It creates a hierarchy where workers are subject to the authority of their bosses. Decisions about production are made from the top down, and workers usually have little to no say in any of these decisions. It alienates workers from their own work, since their production is for the benefit of their boss rather than themselves. Since accumulation of capital is often prioritized over protecting the environment or just paying workers a decent wage, capitalism has led to widespread poverty and disastrous climate change. You may run across anarcho-capitalists in your adventures on the internet, but they're generally frowned upon by anti-capitalist anarchists. Anarcho-capitalism is a right-wing ideology that bears little resemblance to anarchism historically. It's basically just right-wing libertarianism, except with a particular focus on the state and even more co-opting of leftist terminology. Even Murray Rothbard, the darling of ANCAPs the world over, admitted this when he said, "One gratifying aspect of our rise to some prominence is that, for the first time in my memory, we, our side, had captured a crucial word from the enemy. Libertarians had long been simply a polite word for left-wing anarchists. That is, for anti-private property anarchists, either of the communist or syndicalist variety. But now we had taken it over." At one point, he even agreed that anarcho-capitalism was not anarchism at all. "We must therefore conclude that we are not anarchists, and that those who call us anarchists are not on firm etymological ground and are being completely unhistorical. Capitalism and anarchism cannot coexist. For an anarchist to support capitalism is like a fish trying to breathe air. If anarcho-capitalism was ever to be put into practice, which, unlike social anarchism, it hasn't, it would amount to little more than feudalism with bitcoins." The anarchist conception of the state is three-pronged. It is 1. A centralized institution of power with a monopoly on the use of violence, 2. A geographical area over which this violence is exercised, and 3. An administrative body which lays claim to use of this violence. Violence is monopolized in the United States through its police force, which is currently dealing with an epidemic of brutality which has led to the murder of hundreds of people in the past few years alone. It is also spread abroad by the US military, which serves the interests of the American state abroad at the cost of the lives of thousands of innocent civilians. Back at home, parliamentary politics and representative democracy are more and more beginning to represent and reflect the interests of the rich and powerful rather than ordinary citizens. This is something that liberals are starting to catch on to as they move slowly toward the left. However, rather than electing kinder, gentler people into office or attempting to reform these problems out of existence in the way liberals and social democrats do, anarchists question the necessity of the state itself. Generally, we believe that the state is unnecessary and immoral, and that people are capable of governing themselves and each other in an egalitarian fashion, rather than from the top down. Many libertarian socialists and anarcho-communists advocate a classless, moneyless, stateless society. For a more detailed analysis of a conception of what a society organized by these principles might look like, I would suggest watching this video by Libertarian Socialist Rants called "The Case for Liberty." It's important to keep in mind that anarchism is not so much an end goal as it is a constant process, so the way society would be structured on anarchist principles is largely a matter of consensus decision-making and all that good. Some other hierarchical systems and beliefs which you might see anarchists actively opposing include, but are by no means limited to, organized religion, homophobia, transphobia, racism, ableism, etc., whether it be systemic or on an individual level, and, as a bonus, the Prussian education system, a method of educating young people which seeks to make students subservient to authority and is the dominant education system in American K-12 schools, and possibly in many other countries. Those are some big issues, but let's talk about something really topical. Let's talk about gender inequality, sexism, and feminism.
Oh, I'm saying it!
Part 3. Feminism as a component of anarchism. Also commonly opposed by anarchists is a form of hierarchy known as patriarchy. Patriarchy is a hierarchy which places men in a position of authority above women. It's commonplace everywhere from the theocratic Middle East to even the developed Western world. Hierarchies based on something like gender are self-refuting. As such, it's a common belief among many anarchists that any consistent anarchist should also be a feminist. Generally, anarchists who place a large priority on their opposition to patriarchy may adopt the label anarcho-feminist, but I don't feel like this is necessary for me, since I believe strongly that anarchism requires feminism and should just be an assumed thing. There are certainly people in this movement who don't believe patriarchy exists and that feminism is unnecessary or even detrimental to society, but these people are usually viewed unfavorably among anarchists. We commonly refer to them jokingly as manarchists or brocialists. In addition, most anarchist feminists approach feminism through intersectionality and are concerned not just with women's rights, but also the rights of people of color, people with disabilities, sex workers, and the LGBTQ+ community. People who are affected by those systemic hierarchies that I was talking about earlier. See, it all comes together in the end. It's pretty nice. Generally, we don't like TERFs, SWERFs, white feminists, trademark, or upper-class feminists very much, as their brands of feminism value the rights of some women above others. So, does anarchism seem as bad as you thought coming in? I certainly hope not. If you're still not convinced, maybe this'll do the trick. Conclusion. Socialism and anarchism aren't dirty words. People don't often seem to realize that anarchism, or even socialism generally, is a movement that goes back several centuries and includes many of the world's most popular thinkers. Generally speaking, you don't hear much about how George Orwell, Martin Luther King Jr., Helen Keller, Albert Einstein, H.G. Wells, or Charlie Chaplin all supported the ideas of democratic socialism, or in some cases, full-on anarchism. Left libertarianism has also included writers and speakers who have championed liberty in several senses of the term. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Peter Kropotkin, David Graeber, Emma Goldman, Henry David Thoreau, Joseph de Buenaventura Durruti, and Noam Chomsky are just a few examples. Comparing the minds of these people to the figureheads of movements that oppose socialism, there's just no comparison. Murray Rothbard was a historical revisionist who believed that the murder of Germans and Japanese was the overriding aim of World War II, and is cited as the reason that historical revisionism is an important part of the right libertarian position. Milton Friedman was an advisor to Augusto Pinochet, and his neoliberal economic policies ruined Chile's economy, adding insult to the injury that Pinochet's right-wing death squads were causing. Ayn Rand's ideas, as forwarded by Alan Greenspan and Phil Gramm, led to the widening of the wealth gap during the Reagan administration, and eventually the Great Recession in the late 2000s. And even the most noteworthy people in today's online anti-feminist movement who aren't blatant sexists only seem interested in patting each other on the back for sharing a hatred of regressives, and they seem to either not give a shit about or actively partake in and encourage the constant dogpiling and harassing of people who disagree with them. And, of course, there's the ever-growing neo-Nazi movement who calls themselves the alt-right, but they're another story. The point is this. Anarchism answers many of the questions that I was asking myself throughout my entire political journey. I made a video about that, which you can watch right here. It's the system that I feel coincides best with natural forms of human organization, and if it were ever implemented, I feel that it could maximize our creativity, compassion, and ingenuity as a species. To finish, I'll leave you with this excerpt from George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, a book about his experiences in anarchist revolutionary Catalonia during the Spanish Civil War. I hate to read so much of something that I didn't write, but, I just can't help myself. This is a really great book. The workers' militias, based on the trade unions and each composed of people of approximately the same political opinions, had the effect of canalizing into one place all the most revolutionary sentiment in the country. I had dropped more or less by chance into the only community of any size in Western Europe where political consciousness and disbelief in capitalism were more normal than their opposites. Up here in Aragon, one was among tens of thousands of people, mainly, though not entirely, of working class origin, all living at the same level and mingling on terms of equality. In theory, it was perfect equality, and even in practice it was not far from it. There is a sense in which it would be true to say that one was experiencing a foretaste of socialism, by which I mean that the prevailing mental atmosphere was that of socialism. Many of the normal motives of life, snobbishness, money grubbing, fear of the boss, etc., had simply ceased to exist. The ordinary class division of society had disappeared to an extent that is almost unthinkable in the money-tainted air of England. There was no one there except the peasants and ourselves, and no one owned anyone else as his master. Of course, such a state of affairs could not last. It was simply a temporary and local phase in an enormous game that is being played over the whole surface of the earth, but it lasted long enough to have its effect upon anyone who experienced it. However much one cursed at the time, one realized afterwards that one had been in contact with something strange and valuable. One had been in a community where hope was more normal than apathy or cynicism, where the word comrade stood for comradeship, and not, as in most countries, for humbug. One had breathed the air of equality. I am well aware that it is now the fashion to deny that socialism has anything to do with equality. In every country in the world, a huge tribe of party hacks and sleek little professors are busy proving that socialism means no more than a planned state capitalism with the grab motive left intact. But fortunately, there also exists a version of socialism quite different from this. The thing that attracts ordinary men to socialism and makes them willing to risk their skins for it, the mystique of socialism, is the idea of equality. To the vast majority of people, socialism means a classless society, or it means nothing at all. My name's Thom Avella. A better world is possible, and may very well be attainable. Stay legend.